Hello, friends. Let's talk about dissociation today. I believe there's a lot of confusion about what dissociation is, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Dissociation is about the past. The opposite of what dissociation is would be realization. And realization is about coming into realization in the present moment. So, dissociation is about the past. It happens when our system is overwhelmed. So there's a real threat or a perceived threat, and this threat is overwhelming. When that happens, especially for the young brain, dissociation is what occurs. Once dissociation has occurred, the brain can easily go into dissociation again in a future situation. And the more that it goes into dissociation over time, the more likely we will continue to dissociate. So if we are an adult that dissociates a lot, we more likely than not learned this when we were young. And it's just now become the circuitry in our brain started to loop. It identifies and says, hey, this feels overwhelming. I'm now going to dissociate. So what is dissociation? It's about the past. It's literally really about there is a threat and it's an attempt to escape the threat. So when we can't escape it by running or fighting or feeling frozen and paralyzing, dissociation becomes the brain's way of kind of being able to handle that and hopefully survive. It's a survival mechanism that the brain is able to do. And it just says, okay, this is too overwhelming to really realize it, right, in the moment. And especially the young brain can't really comprehend and can't process it. And so again, really likely to dissociate. That young brain isn't developed enough to take really overwhelming situations and process them through. So the overwhelming sense, the brain basically has this capacity where it says, okay, I'm checking out. I'm escaping this threat so we can survive, right? And how does it check out? Well, there's different ways that this can feel for people depending on the situation. But for many people, it feels like everything gets really foggy or blurry. The surroundings around us all of a sudden become very unreal. It also can be an experience like we leave the body. And so almost like we can see kind of what's happening as a witness to some extent. But we're witnessing it like we're somebody else. So it has this other feeling like that wasn't me. It felt like a dream, or, to kind of a huge extent, you hear people say, wow, I actually say in a medical coma or in a medical situation where they say, wow, I actually saw myself, I was floating above my body and I could see my body laying there or something. So that would be kind of an extreme example of like this, like leaving the body. But sometimes it just feels like this other than kind of situation or dream-like, and again can feel real foggy. Dissociation is really preoccupied mind. This is really common, and I think this is what people don't understand. Usually if you say, hey, I had an out-of-body experience, that's what people kind of think of, and they've heard of these situations to an extent, and they may or may not identify that they have similar situations. But there's really a lot of preoccupation because intrusive thoughts are coming in, and or intrusive body sensations, intrusive feelings, emotions, images. So flashbacks really are any of those things, and sometimes a flashback can be all of those things at once. So you can imagine how overwhelming that is. If I was sitting here right now and all of a sudden I started having images and memories and body sensations and feelings from something that was really overwhelming to me years ago, or maybe last week, or maybe before I even remember, who knows, right? But that would be what a flashback is. So a flashback could be content that maybe you just get like intrusive thinking that comes in, or you just get like intrusive body sensations, somatic, and you don't know where they're coming from, like pain. This is very common for people who have these somatic symptoms of pain, but have no realization, or if they go to a doctor and doctor says, well, nothing's wrong with you. I don't know why you're feeling pain right now in the present moment. Oftentimes, that is a dissociative effect from past trauma, and the trauma was painful, or the emotional experience was painful, and now in the present, 1 year later, 1 week later, 10 years later, 50 years later, we have these somatic pain experiences, and it's the body's memory of this pain coming up like a flashback. So remember, flashbacks can just be components of these emotional experiences, or it could be all of this, which would be really overwhelming. But they're intrusive. This is dissociative aspects of a threatening experience from the past coming up in the present moment. Because it has to do with the past, that's why it's dissociative. If it has to do with the present, if right now I have a toothache, and indeed I do have a toothache, and I go and I really need to have my tooth pulled, this is a present moment experience. If I lose something right now, today I lose my job and I become extremely grief-stricken, or really ashamed, or really guilty, or some big emotional experience. That's my experience in the present moment about something that happened. But when there are past, and remember, even a present situation could also bring up the past, so that makes it a little confusing. But I lost my job today, but maybe I've subsequently had a lot of loss in my life. I could have experiences from the past come up at the same time. So there could be dissociative effects as well as present moment effects. So how do we work with dissociation when it's like the past coming up, and however it is coming up for people? Well, one of the ways is we try to integrate the experience. We try to work with the experience and bring the experience into the present, and let the person kind of resolve through what the experience was. And this is what trauma therapy helps us do. It also, in an attempt, we train and teach our clients or ourselves when we're working with trauma to be mindful. And when we're mindful of what's coming up, and we can start to discern, this is about the past and this is about the present, and we can kind of separate that, we can actually start really working with it. So these are some of the ways. I know this is kind of a simple version of it, but giving you an idea of dissociation. Other ways that dissociation can look is lost time. People lose their memory about situations or time periods. That's another real key indicator that dissociation is going on. The brain checked out, doesn't remember. Don't remember that, right? Retreat into fantasy and dreamlike states, daydreams. We all daydream, but this kind of goes beyond what we would say is the normative daydreaming experience, where there's really the realization of the present moment again isn't there. The retreat is really significant, and it's a way of dissociating, again, getting away from threat that was in the past. But when it starts happening in the future, in the present moment, and it's really past, we need to be able to really help and move through that and resolve that. Otherwise, it will continue to happen. One more note, I'm looking at my notes here, that another way that dissociation can come up that I didn't bring up was just the person, and this it could be a personal experience. So whether you are the person having trauma or you're working with someone with trauma, they might account for, or you might account for, being aware of the actions that you're taking. So there is some mentalization and awareness, like, I did this thing, but I felt like I had no control over it. And that it's like this dissociative effect. Like, I kind of saw myself do this, but literally had no access, no control. I'm watching myself. So it's kind of, again, that out of body experience, another way that it could look. One other way that's pretty common is to, like, someone could look in the mirror and they just, it doesn't look like them. It doesn't feel like them. They're so detached that it's like, who is that looking at yourself, right? And this can be a real dissociative effect, or any kind of like trying to reflect on yourself. So if we're really dissociative, we have a really difficult time reflecting, and we have to be able to reflect in order to regulate our emotional experiences. So then we're unable to regulate these emotional experiences. So I think I've given you a lot in this talk, and I hope that's really helpful. Again, post any questions or anything that you have, and I'll see you at the next Trauma Talk. Thanks.